"Fix this if you're so smart," the executive said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Laughter rippled across the polished floor as screens behind her flickered and glitched. She didn't even wait for a response, already turning away like the problem, and the man weren't worth another second. What no one noticed was how the maintenance worker's hands paused, just once. Because this wasn't really about broken systems. It was about who people decided mattered. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. Because beneath the smirk and the silence, something much bigger had already started moving. The man didn't look up. He didn't straighten his back or clear his throat or offer the kind of protest people expected from someone just publicly dismissed. He simply adjusted his grip on the mop handle. Steady, practiced, like his body had learned long ago that reacting fast wasn't the same as reacting smart. The laughter faded quicker than it started. Not because of anything he did, but because indifference has a way of unsettling people who thrive on attention. Elias Moreno had been invisible in this building for nearly 3 years. Night shifts mostly. Early mornings when the offices still smelled like yesterday's expensive coffee and ambition. His uniform was always clean, his boots worn but cared for, and his movements economical. No wasted effort, no noise. To most of the executives, he blended into the background the way the hum of ventilation did. Necessary, but unremarkable. What grounded him wasn't the job. It was the weight in his chest every time his phone buzzed in his pocket. A reminder that time mattered, that paychecks mattered, that insurance approvals mattered. Somewhere across the city, his daughter was waking up in a small apartment filled with pill organizers, drawings taped to the fridge, and a calendar marked with appointments that never seemed to end. Everything he did passed through that filter first. Will this keep her safe? The CEO, Veronica Hale, stood near the glass railing overlooking the atrium, heels planted like punctuation marks at the end of every sentence she spoke. Power clung to her effortlessly. Tailored suit, perfect posture. A voice trained to command rooms without ever needing to raise it. She was used to problems bending around her schedule, not the other way around. The glitch on the screens was minor. Anyone who understood the building's systems could see that. A timing fault. A sync issue between layers that weren't meant to talk to each other directly. Annoying, yes. Embarrassing in front of visiting board members, definitely. Dangerous? Not yet. Elias knew exactly where the issue lived. He'd seen the early signs weeks ago, tucked into logs no one bothered to read anymore. He'd flagged it quietly, the way he did everything. Filed the report, sent it up the chain, watched it disappear into the same void as the others. When the executive smirked and tossed her comment over her shoulder, it wasn't the words that stung. It was the certainty behind them. The unshakable belief that intelligence always announced itself with a title. That competence wore expensive shoes. He finished the section of floor he was on, wrung out the mop, and rolled the cart toward the service corridor. The hum of the building changed as he moved, a subtle shift most people never noticed. He did. He always did. Vibrations through the soles of his boots. A faint whine buried beneath the HVAC system. Patterns out of rhythm. Behind him, the meeting resumed with forced smiles and tighter voices. Ahead of him, the service elevator doors slid open, revealing a narrow space meant for labor, not leadership. He stepped inside without hesitation. As the doors closed, his phone vibrated. Just once. A message preview lit the screen. Insurance review pending. Again. He exhaled slowly, thumb hovering before locking the screen. Whatever happened next in that tower, whatever failures were brewing behind polished glass, it all tied back to this moment. to staying employed, to staying invisible just a little longer. The elevator descended, carrying him deeper into the parts of the building most people forgot existed: cables, access panels, systems stacked on systems, each one trusting the next to behave. Up above, confidence reigned. Down here, the truth waited. The service elevator shuddered to a stop, its doors opening onto a corridor that smelled faintly of metal and dust. He pushed the cart forward, the wheels rattling softly over concrete seams, and listened. Not with his ears alone, though those caught plenty, but with the part of him that mapped systems automatically, tracing cause and effect the way others followed conversation. The hum was stronger down here. It came in pulses now, uneven, like a heartbeat skipping every third beat. That wasn't supposed to happen. He paused near a junction box, resting his palm against the cool wall. Vibrations traveled cleanly through it, carrying information. Something upstream was talking when it shouldn't have been. Above him, Veronica Hale was already reframing the interruption. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. Authority followed her naturally, like gravity. She redirected attention, joked about first-day gremlins, and promised a quick fix. The board members nodded, reassured by tone rather than substance. Screens flickered again, just for a breath, then stabilized. He rolled on. The corridor narrowed, lights switching from white to a duller yellow. This part of the building had been designed for efficiency, not comfort. Exposed conduits lined the ceiling, each labeled in small, fading print. He slowed, eyes scanning without effort, cataloging changes that shouldn't be there. A cable rerouted too recently, a panel replaced with one that didn't quite match. Someone had patched instead of solving. He crouched, unlocking the access door with a key that never left his belt. Inside, the layout confirmed what he already suspected. Two systems overlapping without a proper buffer, forcing timing corrections every few seconds. It worked until it didn't. Until load increased. Until visibility mattered. Footsteps echoed from behind. He didn't look up at first. "You're not authorized to be in there," a voice said, firm but uncertain. Marcus Bell stood a few paces back, tablet tucked against his chest. Facilities manager. Good at schedules, budgets, and keeping executives happy. Less comfortable with what lived behind panels. "Routine check," he said quietly, still focused on the wiring. Marcus hesitated. "The CEO wants this resolved fast. It's already on it." He nodded once. "They will be." That should have been the end of it. Marcus could have walked away, reassured by the calm. But something in the way he spoke, flat, unhurried, made people pause. It didn't sound like guesswork, it sounded like observation. "Can you speed it up?" Marcus asked. He closed the panel and stood, meeting the man's eyes briefly. "It's not about speed." Marcus frowned, uncomfortable. "Look, I know what she said up there. That wasn't—" "It's fine," he interrupted gently. It wasn't fine. But correcting people's behavior had never been his priority. Correcting outcomes was. Marcus lingered another second, then nodded and retreated, already typing notes that would translate the encounter into something more palatable upstairs. He pushed the cart deeper into the sublevel, toward a locked door marked Restricted Access. He swiped his badge. The light flashed green. Another small thing people didn't question enough. Inside, the noise changed again. Louder, more strained. Fans compensating for heat they shouldn't have been dealing with. He felt it in his shoulders. A familiar tension settling in, the kind that came when systems started leaning on each other. Too hard. His phone buzzed. This time, he checked it. A message from the clinic. Appointment rescheduled. Earlier than planned. He closed his eyes for half a second. Earlier meant time off. Time off meant explaining. Explaining meant risk. If you're still with me at this point, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because this is where quiet decisions start changing everything. He slipped the phone away and stepped fully into the room, eyes tracing the racks, the blinking indicators, the patterns most people ignored once they learned which lights meant good enough. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn screwdriver. Not standard issue. Something he'd carried longer than this job. He tightened one connection, loosened another. Temporary relief. A bandage. Enough to buy time. Above, the meeting wrapped up with polite applause. Veronica Hale smiled again, confidence restored, already moving on to the next agenda item. To her, the issue was solved. To him, it was just waiting for the right conditions to fail properly. As he finished, the building settled into a fragile equilibrium. The hum softened, but it didn't disappear. It never did once a system learned bad habits. He wiped his hands on a rag, breathing evenly. This wasn't the moment. Not yet, but it was close. Very close. The thought settled in as he slid the screwdriver back into his pocket and listened to the room breathe. The fragile calm he'd bought wouldn't last long. Systems like these didn't forgive shortcuts. They remembered them. They waited. He shut the access door and guided the cart out, the wheels echoing softly as he retraced his path through the sublevel. The restricted door sealed behind him with a muted click. For a moment he stood there, hand still on the handle, feeling the vibration through the metal. It was subtle, but it was there. Load was climbing again. Upstairs, the building shifted into its afternoon rhythm. Laughter spilled from glass-walled offices. The smell of catered lunches drifted down vents. Somewhere, an executive assistant rehearsed apologies she wouldn't need to use. Confidence returned the way it always did, prematurely. Veronica Hale paced the executive lounge, phone pressed to her ear. She spoke in clipped assurances, promising investors a smooth rollout and praising her team's responsiveness. To her, the interruption had been a momentary embarrassment, already reframed into a story of competence. She didn't ask how the issue had been resolved. She didn't need to. Results were all that mattered. Down below, he pushed the cart into a supply alcove and parked it neatly. His shift technically wasn't over, but his work for the moment was. There was nothing more he could touch without drawing attention. That mattered now. He washed his hands in a utility sink, the water running cloudy before clearing. As he dried them, his reflection stared back. Tired eyes, a line between his brows that hadn't been there years ago. He straightened his shoulders. Habit more than intention. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a voicemail alert. He didn't play it yet. He already knew what it would say. Paperwork, reviews, delays framed as process. Marcus Bell appeared at the end of the corridor, slowing when he spotted him. "Hey," he said, lowering his voice. "Everything stable down there?" "For now." Marcus hesitated, shifting his weight. "IT says they patched a sync conflict. Temporary workaround." He nodded. "I saw. You think it'll hold?" He met Marcus's eyes. "Depends on load." Marcus frowned. "Load's about to spike. The demo servers are coming online." There it was. The condition he'd been waiting for. He kept his voice level. Then someone should monitor it closely. Marcus studied him, something uneasy flickering across his face. "You're sure you're just maintenance, right?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. He didn't react right away, just picked up the rag and folded it carefully. "I fix what I'm assigned." Marcus exhaled, half laughing. Right, sorry, it's just you're calm. Most people aren't. Calm was learned. Earned. The product of rooms where panic got people killed and precision kept them alive. He didn't say that. Marcus's tablet chimed, a message. He glanced down, then back up, concern sharpening. They're bringing partners into the atrium, live dashboards. He felt it then, a deeper vibration threading through the floor. The hum rose, not louder, but tighter, strained. I should get back upstairs, Marcus said. If anything, he nodded. You'll hear it. Marcus gave him a puzzled look but hurried off, footsteps fading. Alone again, he leaned against the wall, eyes closed for a moment. Images surfaced uninvited, whiteboards filled with architectures, late nights arguing over redundancies, the satisfaction of systems that worked because they were respected. He'd walked away from that world when it stopped respecting him back, when it stopped allowing room for hospital rooms and missed meetings, and a small hand wrapped around his finger. He opened his eyes. The building let out a sound like a held breath finally released. Somewhere far above, an alarm chirped once, then cut off. Not enough to cause panic. Enough to notice. He straightened. In the atrium, voices rose. Screens stuttered. A live graph froze mid-climb. Veronica Hale's smile tightened as an assistant whispered in her ear. She waved it off, laughing lightly, but her eyes flicked toward the displays. They flickered again. Down below, he was already moving. Not toward the panels, not yet. Toward the service stairs that ran parallel to the atrium walls, hidden behind frosted glass. A place meant for labor, not leadership. With every step up, the vibration sharpened. Load climbing. Buffers thinning. By the time he reached the landing, the hum had become a warning. This wasn't catastrophic, not yet, but it was no longer ignorable. The warning never announced itself the way people expected. There was no blaring siren, no dramatic blackout. Just a subtle tightening in the air, like a room full of people holding their breath at the same time. He felt it before he saw it, the vibration traveling up the service stair rail and into his forearm as his fingers brushed the metal. Above him, the atrium lights dimmed for half a second. Just enough. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd gathered below. Partners, investors, executives, all pausing mid-conversation as the massive display wall stuttered again. The live dashboard froze, numbers hanging in place like they'd forgotten how to move. He stopped on the landing, eyes tracing the glass panel that separated the service stairwell from the open space beyond. From here, he could see Veronica Hale clearly. She stood at the center of it all, posture still perfect, chin lifted, but the rhythm was off. One heel tapped the marble floor once, then again. A tell most people missed. An assistant leaned in, whispering urgently. Veronica's jaw tightened. She nodded sharply, dismissing the aide with a flick of her hand. Her gaze snapped to the screens, then, briefly, almost involuntarily, toward the stairwell, toward the places where problems lived. He stepped back into the shadow. His phone vibrated. This time, he answered. The clinic nurse's voice was calm in that practiced way that tried not to sound apologetic. She explained the reschedule, the earlier appointment, the need for updated authorization. Words stacked on words until they blurred into one familiar truth. Nothing would move forward without approval. Approval that hinged on employment, on stability. He closed his eyes, forehead resting against the cool concrete wall. "I'll handle it," he said quietly. When the call ended, the silence felt heavier. The hum beneath his feet surged, again, uneven, stressed. The building was compensating harder now, drawing power where it shouldn't, forcing systems into conversations they were never designed to have. Up above, someone laughed too loudly. A brittle sound, the kind that tried to pretend control still existed. He pushed off the wall and continued upward, emerging onto the service corridor that ran behind the atrium. From here, he could access the secondary control interface. Not the one executives toured. The one buried behind layers of security and neglect. As he walked, memories layered over the present. White rooms filled with diagrams. Arguments over cost-cutting measures that shaved safety margins too thin. His voice, younger then, sharper, warning about exactly this kind of cascade. Being overruled, being told they'd accept the risk. He reached the interface and keyed in his access code. The panel flickered to life, lines of data scrolling faster than most people could parse. He didn't rush. Rushing caused mistakes. Load was spiking faster than anticipated. The temporary workaround was collapsing under the weight of the demo servers coming online. Exactly as he'd said. From the atrium, a sharp intake of breath rose as the main display wall went dark. Not fully, just enough to register as failure. Veronica's voice cut through the noise, controlled but edged now. She gestured, directing people away from the screens, reframing again. Another assistant appeared, pale, whispering with urgency that didn't quite stay contained. He adjusted a setting, rerouting a portion of the load away from the most stressed node. The hum softened slightly. Relief, but not resolution. This was where it got dangerous. Where small fixes could give false confidence. Where stepping back would let someone else break it worse. His radio crackled at his belt. "All maintenance staff report status," a voice said, tight. He didn't respond. Not yet. Because responding meant being seen. And being seen meant being pulled into a hierarchy that would slow everything down. That would put decision-making into hands that didn't feel the vibration under their feet. Another alarm chirped, louder this time. It cut off just as quickly, but the effect lingered. Conversation stalled. Heads turned. Veronica's eyes swept the room again, sharper now, landing on the frosted glass of the service corridor. She stared for a fraction longer this time. He knew that look. The moment authority sensed something slipping beyond its reach. His phone buzzed once more. A message preview flashed. Authorization pending. Additional documentation required. He swallowed, jaw tightening. The building shuddered, a deeper tremor passing through the structure as systems strained against each other. This wasn't just about dashboards and demos anymore. This was about timing. About whether intervention came early enough to prevent collapse or late enough to be undeniable. He rested his hand on the control panel, feeling the faint heat beneath the surface. Familiar, almost comforting. Down in the atrium, confidence was cracking. Up here, the truth was no longer patient. The atrium noise sharpened into something brittle, voices rising and falling without rhythm. Elias stayed where he was, hand resting on the control panel, eyes moving between data streams that were no longer pretending to behave. The temporary relief he'd created minutes ago was unraveling fast. Threads snapping one by one as load surged past tolerances no one upstairs remembered existed. Another alarm chirped. This one didn't cut off right away. Veronica Hale's voice carried even through the glass, clipped now, irritation leaking through control. Assistants moved faster, shoes clicking too loudly against marble. The live demo screen stuttered back on, then split into mismatched segments, numbers duplicating, graphs lagging seconds behind reality. Seconds mattered. He typed a command, isolating a failing node before it, dragged the rest down with it. The hum shifted, deeper, angrier, like an engine pushed past redline. Sweat gathered at the base of his neck, not from panic but from heat building where it shouldn't. Cooling systems were compensating, pulling more power into a loop that was already choking. Footsteps approached fast behind him. "What are you doing?" Marcus's voice cracked slightly, breathless. "Buying time," Elias said, not looking away from the panel. "You weren't cleared." "I know." Marcus stepped closer, eyes flicking over the data, scrolling faster than he could read. "It says they're rebooting the demo environment. That'll spike load another 12%, he said calmly. "It'll cascade." Marcus swallowed. "Veronica wants answers. Now." As if summoned, the glass door at the end of the corridor slid open. Veronica Hale stepped inside, expression controlled but eyes sharp with something close to fury. The contrast between her tailored suit and the utilitarian corridor was jarring, like she'd stepped into the wrong reality. She took in the scene in a heartbeat, the panel, the scrolling data, him. "I told you to fix the floors," she said, voice low, dangerous. "Not touch my systems." He finally turned, meeting her gaze without challenge. "Your systems are touching themselves." For a moment, the words hung there, naked and inconvenient. "That's not funny," she snapped. "It's not meant to be." Behind them, the atrium screens flickered again. This time, a section went dark entirely. A ripple of alarm rolled through the crowd, no longer containable. Someone swore, loudly. Marcus's tablet chimed. He looked down, then back up, face pale. "We're losing telemetry." Veronica's jaw tightened. "It?" "They're locked out," Marcus said. The reboot didn't take. Elias turned back to the panel. "Because the conflict isn't where they're looking." He typed again, fingers steady, movements economical. The data responded immediately, a stubborn spike flattening just enough to stop climbing. Veronica stared. "How do you know that?" He didn't answer. Another alarm sounded, deeper this time, vibrating through the glass and into bone. Somewhere in the building, fans roared to life, fighting heat with brute force. The smell of ozone crept into the corridor. "Talk to me," she demanded. He exhaled slowly. Two systems were merged without a proper buffer. It's been unstable for weeks. Today just gave it an audience. Marcus looked between them. "He warned me about load." Veronica's eyes snapped to him. "You didn't tell me." "I tried," Marcus said quietly. The building lurched. Not physically, but digitally. A full section of the demo feed dropped. Gasps echoed from the atrium as the failure became impossible to ignore. Elias leaned closer to the panel. "If I don't intervene fully, this will take the floor down, maybe more." Veronica hesitated. "Just a fraction." "Enough." "And if you do?" she asked. "It'll look bad," he said, "but it'll hold." She stared at him, authority colliding with reality. Around them, the soundscape shifted. Voices rising, alarms layering, the hum becoming a roar. "Do it," she said finally. He didn't gloat, didn't pause, just moved. Commands flowed, rerouting power, forcing systems into configurations they hadn't used since they were designed. The panel warmed under his palms. Familiar heat, the kind that meant things were finally doing what they were told. One by one, the alarms fell silent. The hum eased, settling into a steady rhythm that vibrated cleanly through the floor. On the atrium screens, data reappeared, synchronized, smooth. The crowd's noise shifted from panic to stunned confusion. Veronica let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. If you want to see how this moment comes back around, subscribe now, because this fix just made everything visible. Elias stepped back from the panel, shoulders loosening slightly. This wasn't over, not even close, but now everyone could see it, and that changed everything. Silence spread in layers, not all at once. First, the alarms stopped arguing with each other. Then the fans eased into a lower register. Finally, the crowd noise in the atrium softened, confusion replacing panic as people searched for someone to tell them what had just happened. He stepped away from the panel slowly, palms tingling. The system was stable, for now. Stable in the way a patient was stable after bleeding stopped, not healed, just no longer dying in public. He wiped his hands on the same rag he always carried, the small ritual grounding him as the building found its balance again. Veronica stood very still. Her authority hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. The way she held herself now wasn't the posture of command. It was assessment. Her eyes moved from the restored dashboards on the glass wall to the control panel, then back to him. This time, she didn't look past him. "What did you just do?" she asked. He answered without drama. "I forced a rollback on the merged layers and rerouted cooling priority. It'll hold as long as load doesn't spike again." Marcus let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped for days. "You stabilized the demo." "Yes," he said, "but that wasn't the real problem." Veronica's jaw tightened. "You don't get to lecture me about my own infrastructure." "I'm not," he replied calmly. "I'm explaining the risk." She took a step closer, heels sharp against the concrete. "Your maintenance." He met her gaze. "Today." The word landed heavier than he'd intended. Behind the glass, the atrium screens displayed clean, synchronized data again. Applause broke out in uncertain pockets, relief clapping itself into optimism. Assistants rushed to reassure partners, spinning, narratives in real time. The story upstairs was already changing. Down here, the truth was harder to edit. Veronica folded her arms. "How long have you known about this vulnerability?" "Since before today." "How long exactly?" He hesitated. Not because he didn't know, but because saying it would draw a line backward, straight through decisions she'd signed off on. "Weeks." Marcus winced. "And you didn't escalate it?" she snapped. "I did," he said evenly, "through the proper channels." Marcus shifted, clearing his throat. There were reports. They were flagged low priority. Veronica's eyes flicked to him, sharp. "By who?" Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. The building hummed steadily beneath their feet, an uneasy peace. He felt it in his bones, the system holding because it had to, not because it wanted to. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "The workaround upstairs made it worse. Today, forced exposure. Tomorrow it'll force failure again if nothing changes." Veronica studied him, something unreadable passing across her face. "And you know this because I helped design systems like this. Because I've watched them fail in rooms without glass walls. Because I've been ignored before." He didn't say any of that. "Because patterns don't lie," he said instead. A beat passed, then another. From the atrium came laughter again, louder this time, relief curdling into celebration. Someone toasted resilience. Someone else praised leadership. Veronica's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at the screen, then silenced it without answering. "What's your name?" Marcus looked startled. He'd known it, of course. Schedules required names. But hearing her ask made it feel different. He answered. She repeated it once, testing the sound. "And you're telling me that without you, this building would have gone dark in front of every partner I have?" "Yes." The honesty in it unsettled her more than arrogance would have. She turned toward the glass, watching the crowd she was meant to command. For the first time since stepping into the corridor, her shoulders dropped slightly. Not defeat. Recognition. "Why stay?" she asked, not looking at him. "If you saw this coming." His phone buzzed in his pocket, insistent. He didn't check it. "Because I needed the job." She looked back at him sharply. "That's it?" He nodded once. "That's enough." Another silence stretched, thinner this time, more fragile. Veronica inhaled slowly. "I want a full report from you." He didn't react right away. "That'll change things." "Yes," she said, "it will." Upstairs, applause swelled again as the demo resumed. Cleaner now, safer looking. The narrative was already being sold. Down here, the real story had finally surfaced. He glanced once more at the control panel, committing the readings to memory. This moment wouldn't last. Stability never did. But visibility? That was harder to take back. Visibility had a way of spreading, even when people tried to contain it. The corridor no longer felt as hidden as it had an hour ago. Assistants passed more frequently now, voices lowered, eyes flicking toward the control panel before snapping away. Word traveled fast in buildings like this, not as truth but as shape. Something happened. Someone unexpected was involved, and leadership hadn't looked entirely in control. He stayed near the panel longer than necessary, not because the system needed him, but because leaving would invite questions he wasn't ready to answer yet. The hum beneath his feet remained steady, but he knew better than to trust calm without confirmation. He ran quiet diagnostics in his head, mapping contingencies, rehearsing failures that hadn't happened yet. Marcus returned, slower this time, tablet forgotten at his side. "She wants you upstairs," he said. "When?" "Now." He nodded once, heart rate ticking up just slightly. Not fear, anticipation. This was the moment where systems changed. Not digital ones, but human ones. Where a hierarchy tried to reassert itself by reframing events. They walked together through the service corridor, past doors most executives had never opened. As they approached the atrium, the noise swelled again. Laughter, applause, voices layered over one another in forced normalcy. The glass doors slid open, and the contrast hit immediately. Light, space, eyes. Conversations paused as they stepped out. Not all at once, but enough. Someone recognized the uniform. Someone else remembered the moment by the screens earlier. The crowd's attention shifted, subtle but undeniable. Veronica Hale stood near the display wall, surrounded by partners and senior staff. She was smiling again, but this time it was thinner, more deliberate. When she saw them approach, she excused herself smoothly, the practiced motion of someone used to controlling rooms. "This is the technician I mentioned," she said, gesturing toward him. Technician. The word landed predictably, safe enough to maintain order. She turned to him. "Explain what happened, briefly." Every instinct he had warned against oversimplification. But brevity wasn't the same as dishonesty. He chose his words carefully. A structural conflict in the merged systems caused instability under load. Temporary fixes masked it until demand increased. A murmur rippled through the group. A man in an expensive jacket frowned. That merge was approved months ago. "Yes," he said, "without a buffer." Another executive scoffed lightly. "Our consultants didn't flag that." "They wouldn't," he replied calmly. "It doesn't fail in simulations, only in real conditions." Veronica watched him closely now, eyes narrowed not with anger, but calculation. "And you discovered this, how?" one of the partners asked. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, not long enough to look evasive, long enough to be honest. By watching patterns. That earned a few polite smiles. Skepticism dressed as courtesy. Marcus shifted beside him. "He warned us," he said suddenly. "Weeks ago." Several heads turned. "I saw the reports," Marcus continued, voice steadier than expected. "They were deprioritized. By process." Veronica's gaze snapped to him, then back to Elias. "You said you needed the job," she said quietly. "Yes. And yet you took a risk today." He met her eyes. Losing it later would have cost more. Silence followed. Not the awkward kind, the attentive kind. A woman near the back spoke up. "Have you worked on systems like this before?" He felt the line tightening now, the one he'd been walking toward since the moment she'd smirked and dismissed him. There was no value in deflection anymore, not here. "Yes," he said. "How long?" "Long enough." Veronica inhaled, then nodded once. "Thank you, that will be all." Dismissal, again, controlled, strategic. He turned to leave, shoulders relaxed, but as he did, someone called out. "Wait." It was one of the board members, older, eyes sharp with recognition that hadn't quite found its target yet. "Your approach just now, isolating the node before rerouting. Where did you learn that?" He paused, back still to them. From systems that couldn't afford public failure. Another beat, then quiet laughter, uncertain. Veronica stepped forward. "We'll follow up internally." He nodded and continued walking, the noise resuming behind him in altered form. Conversations restarted, but differently now, quieter, curious. Back in the service corridor, the light dimmed again, returning him to familiar ground. He leaned briefly against the wall, exhaling. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind a deep, steady focus. His phone buzzed. A new message. Authorization approved. He closed his eyes, relief washing. Through him. Not explosive, just heavy and real. One pressure released, many remained. This wasn't victory, not yet. But the balance had shifted, and buildings, like people, never forgot the moment someone proved they'd been wrong about who mattered. The corridor felt quieter after that. Not because fewer people moved through it, but because the building itself seemed to be listening now. Elias pushed the cart slowly, letting the wheels roll without hurry, his mind still replaying the looks upstairs. Curiosity carried a different weight than dismissal. "It followed you." He stopped near a small maintenance alcove and leaned the cart against the wall. The hum beneath his boots stayed steady, but it wasn't settled. Not really. He'd stabilized the surface, redirected the worst of the pressure, but the underlying flaw remained. Systems like this didn't forget stress. They stored it. Marcus found him again minutes later, face flushed, tie loosened. "She wants a full technical. Walk through," he said. "Not just a report. She wants you in the prep room before the evening session." Elias studied him. "With who present?" "Senior leadership, partners, board observers." "Public, then." He nodded once. "I'll need access." Marcus hesitated. She already authorized it. That earned a quiet exhale. Things were moving faster now. Faster than comfort. He reached into his pocket and felt the familiar edge of the worn screwdriver, grounding himself in something physical. They walked together toward the prep room, a glass-walled space adjacent to the main auditorium. As they passed through transitional hallways, Elias caught the fragments of conversation. People speculating, half-informed theories taking shape. Someone said he'd saved the demo. Someone else said it had nearly lost everything. His role blurred and expanded in real time. Inside the prep room, Veronica Hale stood alone, staring at a projected schematic of the building's infrastructure. Her jacket was draped over a chair now, sleeves rolled up. Power, stripped of ornament. She didn't turn when they entered. "Show me," she said. Elias stepped forward, eyes tracing the projection. He didn't ask permission. He adjusted the display, zooming into the merged layers that had caused the failure. Lines overlapped where they shouldn't. Dependencies stacked too tightly. "This is the fault," he said. It wasn't visible until demand increased. Today forced it. Veronica crossed her arms. "And your fix?" "Wasn't a fix," he replied. "It was triage." She looked at him then. Really looked. "Can you prevent it from happening again in front of them?" There it was, the preparation phase of exposure. Not crisis anymore, but controlled revelation. If he spoke now, fully, there would be no walking back into invisibility. "Yes," he said, "but it'll contradict decisions already made." Her mouth tightened. "They can handle that." He wasn't so sure, but this wasn't about comfort. It never was. They spent the next hour dissecting the system, Elias guiding her through failure points she'd never been shown, explaining why consultants missed them, why simulations lied. She asked sharp questions. To her credit, she listened. Outside the glass, people gathered. Quietly at first, then openly. A technician paused mid-step. An executive leaned closer to the window. Curiosity became gravity. If you're still following this, subscribe now, because what's about to happen isn't a private conversation anymore. Veronica straightened as voices rose beyond the glass. "They're ready." Elias adjusted the projection one last time, bringing up live data feeds. "So am I." They stepped into the auditorium together. The room fell silent faster than before. Not out of respect, but anticipation. He felt every eye on him now, the uniform no longer blending into the background. The building's hum vibrated, cleanly beneath the floor, a steady reminder that truth was running live. Veronica addressed the room briefly, framing the earlier incident as a lesson in overlooked risk. Then she gestured toward him. "He identified the failure," she said, "and he's going to explain it." Elias took a breath and began, not with blame, but with structure, with cause and effect, with diagrams that told a story numbers alone couldn't. He showed them where confidence had replaced caution, where speed had overridden resilience. Faces shifted as understanding dawned. Some frowned, some stiffened. A few nodded slowly, recognition sparking too late. When he finished, the silence was heavy. A partner broke it. Why wasn't this flagged sooner? He didn't look at Veronica. It was. Another voice, sharper. By who? By me. The admission landed cleanly. Veronica didn't interrupt. She didn't soften it. She let it stand. Questions followed, hard ones. Elias answered each, without defensiveness, grounding every response in the system itself. The building hummed on, holding steady, bearing witness. By the time the session ended, nothing had exploded. No applause, no confrontation, just something far more dangerous to arrogance. Clarity. As the room emptied, Veronica lingered. "You should have been heard sooner," she said quietly. He met her gaze. "People hear titles, not warnings." She nodded once. "That's on me." It wasn't absolution, but it was a start. And for the first time since he'd pushed a mop through this building, Elias didn't feel like he was standing where power never looked. He felt like power had finally learned where to listen. The auditorium emptied in fragments, conversations peeling off in hushed clusters instead of the confident strides that usually followed executive briefings. Elias stayed near the stage, gathering his notes more out of habit than necessity. His hands were steady, but his awareness was wide, tracking the subtle shifts in the room, the way people glanced back at him, the way some avoided his eyes entirely. Clarity had done its work, and now came resistance. Veronica stood off to the side with 2 board members, their voices low but tense. He didn't need to hear the words to recognize the posture. Damage control, reframing, the instinct to shrink exposure before it hardened into consequence. Marcus approached quietly. "They're split," he said under his breath. "Some want an immediate audit, others want to bury it until after the quarter." Elias nodded. "That won't work." Marcus gave a tight smile. "That's what I said." The building hummed beneath them, steady but loaded. Live data still streamed across the screens overhead, transparent now, unforgiving. Anyone watching closely could see the truth. Stability was being held, not solved. A sharp voice cut through the murmur. "We can't present this externally." Elias turned. One of the senior partners had stepped forward, jaw set, eyes hard. "You're asking us to admit we ignored warnings from maintenance staff." He met the man's gaze evenly. "I'm asking you to fix a system before it fails publicly." "That's semantics," the partner snapped. "No," Elias replied calmly. "That's engineering." Veronica intervened smoothly. "Let's take a breath." The partner scoffed. "With respect, this sets a precedent. Anyone can claim expertise after the fact." Elias felt a familiar tightening then, not anger, but resolve. This was the moment arrogance tried to reassert itself through doubt. "Then test it," he said. The room quieted again. "Test what?" the partner asked. "The system," Elias said. "Increase load, use real parameters, not simulations." Marcus's eyes widened. "That could destabilize." "It will," Elias said. "Briefly, and then it won't." Veronica looked between them, weighing risk against exposure. "You're confident." "Yes." "Enough to stake your job?" He didn't hesitate. "Enough to stake my credibility." That mattered more. Silence stretched. Finally, Veronica nodded once. "Do it. Controlled environment, now." Technicians scrambled, rerouting feeds, adjusting parameters. The room filled again as word spread. Something was about to happen. People returned, drawn by the promise of proof. Elias moved to the control interface at the side of the stage. This time, no one stopped him. Screens displayed live metrics as load began to climb. The hum deepened, vibrations tightening underfoot. Numbers spiked, graphs strained. A murmur rose. "Watch the buffer," Elias said quietly. At the precise moment the partner expected failure, Elias initiated the correction. Rerouting, isolating, balancing with movements so efficient they barely registered as action. The system dipped, then leveled. The hum smoothed. Gasps rippled through the room. The load climbed higher. Again he adjusted. Again the system held. "This configuration isn't documented," the partner said sharply. "It wasn't approved," Elias replied. "That's different." Veronica watched the screens, then the faces around her. There was no spinning this now. The evidence was live, undeniable. She turned to the room. "We ignored a warning because it didn't come from where we expected expertise to live." No one argued. Elias stepped back as the test concluded. The system settled into a new equilibrium, stronger than before. The partner exhaled slowly. "What do you need to implement this permanently?" Elias answered without triumph. "Authority to rebuild it properly." Veronica met his eyes. "You'll have it." The room buzzed with a different energy now, not admiration, not guilt, respect. As people filtered out again, this time quieter, more thoughtful, Elias felt the shift complete. The exposure wasn't explosive, it was surgical, and far harder to undo. The building hummed on, cleaner than it had all day. For the first time, the truth wasn't being managed. It was being acted on. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The absence of argument said more than applause ever could. Elias stood beside the console, hands resting lightly on the edge, feeling the building settle into a rhythm that finally made sense. The hum beneath the floor was cleaner now, almost quiet, like a machine relieved to be understood. Veronica broke the silence by turning to the remaining board members. "We're suspending the rollout schedule," she said, "effective immediately." A few sharp breaths followed. No one objected. They'd seen too much. "We rebuild the infrastructure," she continued, "with full transparency, no shortcuts, no cosmetic fixes." Her gaze shifted back to Elias, and this time there was no calculation in it, just resolve. "And we do it with the person who actually understands it." The words traveled fast. Phones came, out. Messages flew. Somewhere upstairs, assistants were already rewriting calendars and explanations. The company's narrative was being forced to bend around reality instead of smoothing over it. Marcus stepped closer to Elias, voice low. "They're offering you a formal role." Elias didn't respond right away. He watched the screens one last time, confirming stability, confirming honesty. "Doing what?" "Leading the rebuild," Marcus said. On record. Poetic in its own way. Veronica addressed the room again. "This failure wasn't technical," she said. "It was cultural. We dismissed the wrong signals because they came from the wrong place." That landed harder than blame. One of the partners cleared his throat. "We'll need documentation, background checks." Elias finally spoke. "That's fine." Veronica nodded. "You'll get them." As the room thinned out, she approached him directly. Not as a figurehead now, but as a person navigating. Consequence. "I was wrong," she said, simple, unadorned. He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "It happens." She almost smiled at that, almost. They moved to the side of the auditorium, away from the last stragglers. "You could have let it fail," she said quietly, in front of everyone. "Yes." "Why didn't you?" His phone buzzed in his pocket, a reminder he didn't need to check anymore. Because fixing it mattered more than being right. She absorbed that, the truth of it settling into something heavier than pride. "I don't say this often," she said, "but I'm glad you were here." So was the building. Later, as technicians began the controlled shutdown required for a proper rebuild, Elias walked the perimeter one last time. People nodded at him now. Some thanked him. Others simply watched, reassessing old assumptions in real time. He didn't linger on any of it. He stepped into the service stairwell, the same place where it had started, and paused. The contrast felt different now. Less like a divide. More like a reminder. Outside, evening light spilled through the atrium windows, washing over marble and glass, and the workers cleaning up the day's mess. He passed one of them and offered a brief nod. It was returned, easy, equal. As he reached the exit, Marcus caught up with him. "You didn't answer," he said. "About the role." Elias considered the question as the doors slid open, cool air hitting his face. "I'll take it," he said, "on one condition." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "That warnings don't get filtered by uniforms anymore." Marcus smiled. "I think that's already changed." Outside, the city moved the way it always did, indifferent to glass towers and boardrooms. Elias took a deep breath, feeling something unclench in his chest that had been tight for years. He checked his phone. A message from the clinic confirmed everything was set. Approved, covered, For the first time that day, he smiled. Not because he'd won, but because dignity, once restored in public, had a way of staying put. The next morning didn't feel triumphant. It felt quieter, heavier, like the air after a storm when debris hasn't been cleared yet. Elias arrived early, habit refusing to break just because circumstances had changed. The building greeted him with the same revolving doors, the same polished floors, but something in the way people moved had shifted. Fewer phones raised, more eyes actually looking. He took the service corridor again, not out of obligation, but respect. The hum was different now. Cleaner. Balanced. He paused once, palm brushing the wall, confirming what his instincts already told him. The system was holding because it had been rebuilt honestly, not patched into silence. Voices drifted from a conference room ahead. He recognized the tone immediately. Discomfort wrapped in professional language. We can't pretend this was an isolated incident. That's not what investors want to hear. What investors want doesn't change physics. He didn't interrupt. He waited until the voices noticed him, until the conversation stalled on its own. Veronica stepped out first. She looked tired in a way no amount of rest fixed. Consequence had weight. "We're revising reporting structures," she said. "Direct access, no filtering." He nodded. "That's a start." One of the board members lingered behind her, arms crossed, expression tight. "You understand this puts us under scrutiny." "Yes," Elias said. "That's usually how improvement works." The man studied him for a long moment, then gave a stiff nod and walked away. Not agreement, acceptance. Veronica exhaled slowly. "You didn't enjoy that," she observed. "No," he said. But it mattered. They walked together toward the atrium, the space no longer buzzing with spectacle but humming with work. Crews moved deliberately, not rushed. The building felt like it was learning how to breathe properly again. "I built my career on control," Veronica said quietly, "on believing authority could replace understanding if I surrounded myself with enough experts." He didn't respond right away. "Experts still matter," he said eventually. "They just have to be listened to." She nodded once. "I dismissed you because you didn't look like them. That's common. Still unacceptable." They stopped near the glass railing. Sunlight spilled across the floor, catching dust motes that hadn't been there yesterday. Or maybe he just noticed them now. "What happens next?" she asked. He considered the question. "We finish the rebuild. We document everything. We teach people how to spot problems before they become emergencies." "And you?" she pressed. "I go home on time," he said. "Some days." That earned a small, real smile. His phone buzzed softly in his pocket. Not an alarm, not a warning, just a reminder set months ago and never cleared. "Pick up meds." He silenced it, then removed the reminder entirely. Across the atrium, someone new joined the maintenance crew, wide-eyed, taking in the space with a mix of awe and nervousness. Elias caught their glance and offered a brief nod, the same one he'd exchanged with others for years. It landed differently now. Respect wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It showed up in moments like this. Veronica straightened. "I owe you more than an apology," she said. He shook his head gently. "Just don't waste the lesson." She watched him walk away, not toward an office but toward the stairs, toward the parts of the building where things actually worked. Later, as afternoon light softened into evening, Elias stood near the exit again. The city waited outside, indifferent as ever. He liked that about it. It didn't care who you were inside a glass tower. As he stepped out, he felt lighter. Not because the fight was over, but because it had finally been honest. Because dignity once restored in front of witnesses, didn't need defending every second. Behind him, the building hummed steadily. Not in submission, in balance. The evening settled in without ceremony. No cameras waited outside the building. No congratulatory emails flooded his phone. Elias preferred it that way. He walked the long way to the exit, past familiar corridors and newly opened doors, past people who now nodded with something like understanding instead of habit. The building didn't feel conquered. It felt correct. Outside, the city moved on schedule. Traffic lights changed. Buses sighed at stops. Somewhere, a child laughed too loudly for a moment before being shooshed. He stood there, breathing it in, letting the day finally loosen its grip on his shoulders. At home, the apartment lights flicked on with a soft click. The space was small, lived in, full of signs of continuity rather than success. Shoes by the door, a half-finished puzzle on the table. He set his keys down and listened. The quiet wasn't empty, it was earned. His daughter looked up from the couch, eyes bright. "You're early." "Yeah," he said, smiling. "Looks like I can be." They ate together without rushing. No phone buzzing, no alarms. Just the simple, fragile luxury of time that didn't feel borrowed. When she laughed, it didn't echo against worry, it filled the room. Later, after she fell asleep, he stood by the window and looked out at the city again. Somewhere out there, glass towers glowed, full of people who believed power lived where titles said it did. Some of them had learned something today. Others would learn later. Change didn't arrive all at once. It came in moments, in witnesses. The next week brought meetings, plans, uncomfortable conversations that couldn't be avoided anymore. Systems were rebuilt with care instead of speed. Reporting lines flattened. Warnings stopped getting lost. It wasn't perfect. It never would be, but it was honest. Veronica kept her word. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, it carried less certainty and more curiosity. Authority hadn't vanished. It had matured. Elias saw it in small decisions. Questions asked sooner. Assumptions challenged quietly. People invited into rooms they'd never been allowed to enter before. One afternoon, a junior technician stopped him in the hallway. "I just wanted to say, thanks for saying something." He nodded. "Keep saying it." That was how dignity lasted. Not in one dramatic reversal, but in repetition, in refusing to go quiet again. On a walk home, he passed a construction site where workers were packing up for the day. Someone had left a sign propped against a fence. "Fix it right the first time." He smiled at the coincidence and kept moving. Power didn't belong to people who smirked the loudest. It belonged to those who understood consequences and chose responsibility. Anyway, it lived in places leadership rarely looked until it had no choice but to turn its head. That was the real correction. Not the system, the vision. If this story stayed with you, it's probably because you've seen a version of it before. Maybe you were the one ignored. Maybe you were the one who laughed and didn't realize what you were missing. Either way, moments like these ask the same question every time. What would change if we listened sooner? Now, I want to hear from you. What should the next story title be? Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Fly this helicopter and I'll marry you. CEO mocked the janitor. His true identity left her stunned. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?